Welcome to Discovering. Tonight, as promised, we return to the Kass Sugarbush while all the family is in town to see how they process all of that sap into pure maple syrup, and we see inside their sugar house operation. I think there's somebody behind me too, isn't there? So sit back and relax. It's Monday night, and it's time for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone, forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak, surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields, call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill, the eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
We're back at the Kass Sugarbush with the whole family. Dave's wife, kids, their spouses, and 7 grandsons are all here to help make syrup and enjoy some time together. It's a warm spring day. The sap is still flowing from the trees to the pump house, from the pump house to the sugar house, and inside the sugar house it's moved from tank to evaporator to stainless steel jug to glass bottle in a process that turns this into this.
When sap is collected from a maple tree, it's about 2% sugar. The rest of it's water. So we have to boil enough water out of the sap in order to concentrate the syrup to about 66.9%. At 66.9%, syrup is concentrated enough that bacteria and mold can't grow in it, so this bottle of syrup can be stored at room temperature for several years without spoiling. We have several different methods that we can use to measure the concentration in syrup when we're boiling it. The easiest method is to use a thermometer. When syrup boils, as it becomes more concentrated, the temperature in the syrup increases. Syrup boils at 7 degrees above the temperature of boiling water. At normal atmospheric pressure, water boils at 212 degrees. So under those conditions, maple syrup would be at the correct concentration when it reaches a temperature of 219 degrees. The boiling point of water is affected by the barometric pressure, so if you have a high barometric pressure and the barometer reading is above average, the boiling point of water can actually be higher than 212. So for instance, if it's 213 degrees on that day, you would have to boil syrup to 220 degrees in order to achieve a concentration of sugar in there for it to be safe to bottle at that point. A more accurate way of measuring the concentration of sugar in maple syrup is to use a syrup hydrometer. Syrup hydrometers have 2 readings on them, and so you can see there's a red line at the near the top of the hydrometer, and that indicates the correct syrup sugar concentration when the syrup is hot right out of the evaporator. This sample of syrup's been sitting at room temperature, and so the bottom line indicates the correct concentration for room temperature sap. If you look closely at the hydrometer reading, there's a number scale on there, and right now the syrup is floating at about 68% sugar, which is above the line for the minimum concentration. So we know this syrup is completed. A more accurate way of actually measuring the concentration of sugar in syrup is to use a syrup refractometer. Refractometers measure sugar concentration by determining how much light rays are bent as they pass through the sample of syrup. And so in order to use this refractometer, we put a couple of drops of syrup on the prism, and then we cover it, and then look through the eyepiece, and there's a number scale in there, and this is reading about 68.5% sugar. I took a picture of that on my cell phone, and so you can see the line where the dark blue and light blue meets is the actual reading. Refractometer indicates that our sugar concentration in the syrup we made is about 68%, which agrees with the hydrometer.
You have to pull this off, and then you turn it, and then you hold. And then you take it, and then you push it in, and then it's safe.
We have a few bags that we've placed on trees close by so that the kids can collect it, and that gives us a chance to kind of keep track of how the sap is running.
Ready? Fold it over the bucket. Good job. Up in the tree.
Oh, that is heavy.
Can you carry it?
So we have a tank here that holds about 300 gallons of sap. Most of the sap that's collecting in this tank right now is coming in through our tubing line. We have a vacuum pump set up here, and so you can see the sap flowing through the vacuum pump. When we get a good flow with about 350 trees, we're able to fill this tank completely in one day. So today it's flowing pretty well, so you can see there's quite a bit of sap coming in there. The vacuum actually assists in the sap flow. When you apply vacuum to a sap tubing, it actually increases the flow from the tree. So instead of getting, maybe a gallon of sap, you're going to get 2 gallons of sap. As you can see right now, this is sap coming from our holding tank. We're going to put sap in here, and once I have the level high enough, I'll be able to turn the RO unit on, and that sap will run through a membrane which concentrates the sap from about 2% to about 4%. Each time we run it through that membrane, it doubles the concentration of the sap. So we can get as high as 8 or 10% with the RO unit we have. Instead of boiling for hours and hours, if we run it through the RO, we'll cut our boiling time down to a quarter or less of what it would be if we were just using the raw sap. So this tank holds about 200 gallons of sap, and so what we'll do is once the tank is full, we'll get the RO unit going, and the sap from this tank will go through the RO unit, and then we'll drain it into this head tank up here, and then that tank drains into the evaporator by gravity. The flow of sap into the evaporator is controlled by this float box. As the sap level drops with evaporation, the valve opens and it allows more sap to flow in. So we get a constant flow of sap, and so we don't have any danger of burning the evaporator too low and scorching the pan. We have enough sap in here now, so we're going to turn the pump off, and then we'll go in and get the reverse osmosis unit running. These units work under high pressure. So we have one pump that supplies sap to the high pressure pump. The normal water pressure in a home is about 60 pounds per square inch. You can see here that once we have the high pressure pump running, we're actually forcing sap into the membrane at 225 pounds per square inch. So it's a lot of pressure. That's enough pressure to force the water molecules through this semi-permeable membrane inside of the canister. Sugar molecules are larger than water molecules, so they get left behind, and so that's how we concentrate sap. RO units are commonly used in homes and industry to purify water. In this case, we're actually using it to concentrate the sap, and then that purified water we can use later to flush the system out. So we're going to hit this switch. This will turn on the circulating pump. That's going to feed sap into our high pressure pump. We have to let that pressure build up a little bit. So now we can hear that high pressure pump is working, and so we'll adjust our pressure here using this dial so that we're getting about 225 pounds. You can see that pressure is slowly building up. We should be able to get that to about 225 pounds per square inch, and then it's circulating back through this pipe into the tank, and we'll let that recirculate as we continue to take water off of it. This level will drop, and the concentration of the sap in this tank will go from about 2% up to 8%, and the water that we're taking out will actually be collected in that tank there. This sap has been run through the RO membrane several times, and so it started at about 2% sugar concentration. We'll measure it now, and it should be somewhere around 7 or 8%, which is about where we want it to run it into the evaporator. So we'll use a little sap hydrometer. It's similar to the syrup hydrometer, but it's capable of measuring sugar concentrations in the 0 to 10 or 12% range. We went from sap that was about 2% up to about 7 or 8% sugar. So we've removed almost 125 gallons of water from about 200 gallons of sap. And we did that in probably an hour, hour and a half of time. It would have taken us probably 3 or 4 hours to boil that much water out, with just the evaporator. So it's a time saver. This evaporator is capable of processing anywhere from 40 to 60 gallons of sap each hour.
So we're starting to draw some of the syrup off here. We've reached the correct temperature, and actually looks like we're slightly above there, so we're in good shape with this. So right now we are drawing it off from this finishing part of the pan. So the syrup that we're taking out is coming directly from here and then down into here. In the back, that's where our sap first comes into the evaporator, and as the sap is more concentrated and getting closer to that maple syrup state, it moves up to this front finishing pan, and there are several different kind of grooves or different lanes that the sap travels through, and this last one is where we're drawing it from. So this is sap that's been in the evaporator the longest, and it's the most concentrated and the closest to maple syrup. So maple syrup is roughly 7 degrees above the boiling temperature of water. So as you can see, we're slightly over. That's not a huge worry, because we can add in some sap that's not quite to that syrup state and kind of balance it out with the sugar content. As we're drawing it, we always want to draw it really, really slowly, because again, this is really hot and we don't have a super high level of fluid in there. So if we open this valve off and poured it all out, first of all, that part of the pan would get exposed to the heat, and we could potentially burn or scorch our pan. But then second of all, it would be hard for us to control and ensure that all of that syrup that we're drawing off is the right consistency. So we're gonna keep drawing this off till we get slightly below 7, and then we'll turn it off and continue boiling. And this is where we're trying to remove as much water as we can, and again, that's why we have the steam hood on here. It's helping with that, and the steam is coming up this tube here and being pulled out from the evaporator.
Each one of these float pans allows us to adjust the height of the syrup that's boiling. So this pan controls the syrup height in the front area here, and there's a little float valve here that as the sap comes in, it shuts off the flow from the back pan. As this level drops, then of course it lets more sap in from the back pan, and we also have that same type of a float pan on the other side of the evaporator to allow sap to come in from the tank there. So
he's gonna load up the evaporator here, and the first thing that he's gonna do is he's gonna turn the forced air off. If he didn't turn that off, we'd get a lot of ash flying back out from us here. So he's gonna let that kind of settle down. And the process that we're using is we're kind of building almost like a log cabin, kind of a crisscross approach. It helps let that heat get up quicker through this. And again, because we have that forced air, we're able to make that fire burn hotter and quicker. So he's gonna put that wood in, turn it on, and he'll repeat this process in probably 5 minutes. So
we're fortunate, we got enough wood on the 40 that we make all of our own wood here. So it's kind of my primary task, is I make the firewood. So a lot of people like to burn it, but not a lot of people like to make it. So that's where I come in. So we try to burn hardwood if we can. We'll mix in some softer woods like basswood and ash too, just so that we're not burning up all the hardwood. But The hardwood's nicer because it keeps a more consistent heat, and you get a better syrup out of it if you can get that nice consistent low heat.
More about syrup making in a bit, but first, it's time for an Easter egg hunt.
3, 2, 1, go!
He got it! I can get Oh, what's this? Nice. What should I do?
We're going to finish our syrup a little bit later on. We've made probably 4 or 5 gallons here so far today. Once we get enough syrup made, we're going to actually filter it through a filter press. And what a filter press does is force the syrup under pressure through a series of these filter plates. So each one of these paper filters is inserted between the plate. You can see there's a hollow space there to allow the sediment to collect in there. And so we'll put a filter paper between each plate. Just the quality of the syrup is much better by removing all those small particles. When you hold the syrup up to the light, it's very clear. So just another way to improve the quality of the syrup. It would take probably 2 hours for 10 gallons of syrup to slowly filter through this by gravity. So that's another reason that using a filter press in 10 minutes or so, we can force that syrup through the filter press and get a much clearer syrup in a lot less time.
One of the first memories I have of making maple syrup was I probably was 3-4 years old, and we used to have a crawler tractor that we would use for collecting the sap, and at that time we would finish the syrup on a wood stove. We had a wood stove in the camp. It was an old wood stove, cast iron top, and we would draw the syrup off as pre-syrup and then finish it on that stove. So my father took me out on the crawler to give me a little bit of a ride, and we got the syrup starting on the stove, which was obviously a big mistake. And we were driving around, and all of a sudden we could see smoke coming from the camp, and the pre-syrup started boiling, and it boiled over on top of the cook stove, and so we had to run in and get that off. And
my job used to be with the old-fashioned evaporator. They'd have a net like this, and I would have to sit there and scoop the bubbles and the scum off of it. But now my job's been replaced by the more efficient evaporator and adding the fats to it to get rid of it, but not a bad problem to have.
Well, I don't know how many gallons this can is, but it's just about full. Yeah, we're starting to draw it off faster now because we're boiling the more concentrated stuff that went through the RO, so we're pulling off about every 5 minutes now, so we're running out of sap, which by this time of the day isn't a bad problem.
it's good.
It's good.
I approve.
What do you rate this? Grade it.
I would say that's definitely light amber, very light color.
Well
Very
done,
delicate.
I think my favorite thing today was watching. You can tell this is one of the places and one of the things that makes Dad's whole heart and soul happy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's probably the biggest gift that, our grandpa, I never met him, he died so young, but probably the biggest gift he had was, giving us this place, and it brings everybody back together to have good times and stuff. So that's really what it's all about.
This is a poem that my daughter-in-law actually wrote, and I think she captured the essence of the process there.
Deeply Rooted, a poem by Catherine Kass. From generation to the next it shall pass, a sanctuary in the woods for kin, where trees stand like monuments in the grass, and where hardships and sacrifice grow thin. A testament to nature's bounty, men descend with the bucket and the spile. You'll find them near a grand maple tree, vigorous work, but joyful all the while. When sun shines warm, the trees give nature's gift, boiled down at the hands of men so sweet. With beer and stories into night they drift, a liquid amber like no other treat. The relationship is rooted deep, you'll see, between these kinsmen and their maple tree. That's all for tonight, and I hope to see you right back here next week for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.